Good afternoon and welcome to the IIMA Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group webinar series. As many of you know, the Alumni Special Interest Groups at IIMA are platforms that the Institute has designed that bring together alumni, faculty, and students and leverage the collective intellectual resources engaged in areas such as healthcare, education, entrepreneurship, marketing, etc., to bear on some of the most challenging issues of our times. Now, faculty and alumni are already making stellar contributions in their respective fields. But the Alumni Special Interest Group platform allows them to collaborate with each other much more intimately and also to engage with industry and practitioners in a much more multifaceted manner. Now, to facilitate this interaction, we have created 14 such ASIGs and more will, of course, follow in due course. Today we have gotten together for the Alumni Public Policy Special Interest Group webinar series. And now the Alumni Public Policy Special Interest Group is a group of alumni and faculty of the Institute with expertise and interest in the fields of public policy and development. It fosters collaboration among the IIMA community, which includes faculty, students, and alumni, and the wider world of public policy practitioners to contribute to India's inclusive development agenda. An important activity of the Alumni Special Interest Groups are the webinar series, which bring the thoughts, views, and expertise of renowned experts to the IIMA community. Now hand it over to Akhilesh Tilotia, who is one of the alumni coordinators of the Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group, to introduce the new webinar series that the Public Policy SIG has embarked upon. Akhilesh, over to you.
Thank you, Anurag. As Anurag mentioned, the idea of IIMA's Public Policy Special Interest Group is to talk about and engage deeply with experts on ideas which are of topical interest and also in some sense allow for the shaping of the policy on as they evolve. Cryptocurrency is, I think, an interesting topic currently because there has been a lot of policy flux over the last very many years in India. There has been a steady bunch of enthusiasts and business models that have come up over the last many years. There have been some regulatory uncertainties on what is permitted, what is not permitted, and how it should ideally evolve. What we did last week, is had Kamal come over and speak with us and talk to us about the basics of Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. That was a master session lasting 90-100 minutes, and I strongly recommend anyone who wants to come up to speed on the basics and some more technicalities to please watch that. What we have today is a discussion with an expert. We expect to put together at least 4 to 6 experts over the next few weeks, such that as we make up our thinking on how this field should evolve, this could potentially end up becoming a policy paper from the Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group. I would like to thank Kamal, a fellow alumnus of the 2004 batch, for being an enthusiastic participant and taking us through this series. Kamal, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Akhilesh. Thank you so much. So as Akhilesh said, and Anurag before him, what we are doing is setting up a webinar series, and we will bring to you the who's who of the cryptocurrency space within India and hopefully even outside. Today we have with us Mr. Ashim Sood, who is a lawyer involved in constitutional and commercial law cases in the Supreme Court, High Court, and other courts, including arbitral tribunals. And his areas of interest include technology, free speech, censorship, and privacy law. So with that, welcome, Ashim. Happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you.
And let me know my voice too well, because it's hard to tell. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can. And we can maybe check with the others as well, if everyone's able to hear you.
We can.
Perfect. Okay. So, yeah, Ashim. So, tell us more about your involvement with the cryptocurrency space, right? And for those before we get started, for those who don't know, Ashim was the lead counsel in the cryptocurrency space case that was against the RBI circular that was passed in 2018, which was overturned last year in March 2020 by the Supreme Court. Right. So that's the context, and with that, Ashim, tell us more about what was the experience like. How long was it, and what did it entail?
Well, so first of all, thank you at the beginning for characterizing whoever attends this as an expert. But I assure you, I'm not an expert on cryptocurrency. If I have any expertise, I could pretend to have some of the law. But so my involvement with cryptocurrency itself has been as a result of a litigation that was initiated against the circular. And my job is usually to stand up in court and make a case for whatever it is that I'm briefed on. There is a large group of young lawyers out in the country today who, like many young people, are, I think, very, very clear that technology is something that India can engage with in the same way that any other country in the world can engage with. You know, all our other disadvantages that we've traditionally had as a developing nation, they fall away when it comes to engaging with technology. And that group of lawyers has been quite innovative in the legal space. Lawyers are usually a very traditional and conservative group in the sense of understanding new things. We are used to, we only feel satisfied when it's shown to us that a rule is 150 years old. So everything that talks about 150 years in the future is something that many lawyers, judges, everybody's a little afraid to grapple with. It's not afraid, but just a little, it's not their comfort zone. So this group had been engaging with cryptocurrency for a long time. As you probably know, we had a lot of young Indians were excited about this new. Now it's I think a fairly legitimate asset class, but at that time it was an emerging asset class. They weren't excited only from the asset class point of view. I think blockchain itself had so many applications that people were excited about it. But yes, there was a whole group of Indians who had decided to build their lives around the emergence of this asset class. So people had set up exchanges. People were speculating. People were thinking of ICOs, and a lot of this sounds newfangled, or it did sound newfangled, and people are always suspicious of newfangled things. But I think the world has been engaging with cryptocurrency for a long time, and Indians were just beginning to reflect that enthusiasm. And so when the RBI brought this circular and essentially rendered everything comatose in that space, there was a lot of, I guess everybody was upset. And they decided to bring this case to the Supreme Court, and somehow a piece of this case fell into my hands also. My participation in this case has been from the beginning. In fact, it was even before this case was filed, before the RBI circular came out, there was a bunch of public interest litigation going on. Some people were saying you must direct the government to regulate cryptocurrency. Some people were saying that this is new evil that has emerged and it must be banned. So I'd been engaged by some lawyers who were representing cryptocurrency exchanges, and my arguing the case or becoming lead counsel was not a given. There were some senior advocates who were also involved in it, but as a matter of circumstance, more fortune, I'd say, for me personally, I happened to end up being the lead lawyer in it. So the case went on. It was actually an interesting, it's something I haven't encountered before. We argued the case in August of 2019 for several days. And at the very fag end, my sense is that the court was struggling because they saw that we had a point. But no court likes to set aside actions by the Reserve Bank. And I think there is some justification for that. I'm not saying there isn't. So at the very end, the presiding judge on the bench of on that time there was two judges. The senior judge turned to the RBI and said, "Look, why don't you reconsider your circular?" And suddenly we had argued for about several days, and this was something entirely new. I haven't seen it before either. When a case is argued at the fag end, and the RBI said, "No, no, we don't want to reconsider," and the judge said, "I'm suggesting that you reconsider," which I think made very clear to the RBI which way the wind was blowing on that day. And they took time to reconsider it. We knew that the RBI ultimately is a fairly strong and independent-minded organization. We knew that they would come back saying that we reconsidered and we are not going to change our minds. But in the meantime, the bench changed. The rule is that when a bench that has heard a case changes, then the case has to be reheard. And so we were back in court in January, and the judge turned to me and said, "Start from the beginning." And
I did not know that.
Yes, so we started again on, I think it was January 19th,
Of last year.
2020. And the case then went on for, I think it was argued for at least 20 to 30 hours in court. So,
but do we know why a bench would change?
It happens. Judge retire, for instance. There's if two or three judges retire, they have to shake up the composition of benches. That happens. That's not unusual. That's not unusual. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm guessing you started off right after the circular. I mean, at least on this case, your involvement started after April 2018 and then went all the way till March 2020. So full 2 years.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of, you see, if it's ultimately the life of a case depends on the on the view of the judge. And if this had been a case of, something more recognizable, a film that is banned. I've done a few censorship cases, and you go into a courtroom and you say that my film has been banned. And a judge understands that, and he says, "Oh, that's very bad because you're, presumptively that's a violation of your free speech. You needn't say anymore. That's all I need to hear. I'll hear your case right away because we always prioritize, or judges are supposed to prioritize civil liberties." So this was a similar case because we said our business has been brought to an end, and that also is an aspect of liberty. But I think to convince a court to hear it urgently was a challenge. And again, it got heard on a certain day fortuitously because all the other important cases got adjourned, and we got on with it. So it took 2 years. It was 2 long years, and I was dealing with members of the community of the exchanges who were, I think they were beginning to lose faith a little bit in our system.
Yeah. No, so I was reading the judgment recently, and I do recall that, it's a 180-page judgment, right? And all the way till, I think, at least 150 pages, there are no signs that this is going to turn the way it did in the last pages, right? So what happened? If you have to map out the progress of those 2 years, what went first and what came at the end?
Well, I don't think the 2-year period is relevant to what happened. The only thing that's relevant is what happened in court in those 2 weeks that it was actually argued. But I can tell you what my thinking was, and I don't know if and what my approach to the case was. I don't know if that approach succeeded because only the judges who wrote the judgment know why they wrote it. But I think I may not be too far off the mark. Number one was that we were coming up against the RBI. And I think this was only the second time in Indian history that an RBI action has been found illegal by the court. And remember, we have a strong independent judiciary, and they routinely find government actions to be bad in law. So,
and the RBI actually predates the Union of India as well.
It does. But through this process, I pulled out every case that has ever been filed vis-a-vis the RBI, And I kept finding a stream of thought running in those cases, which was that we are not going to second guess the monetary regulator of our economic system. I think that's justified to a large extent. So I knew that we're up against possibly the most formidable foe. And then there's another stream of jurisprudence in our case law, which is that when it comes to economic legislations that don't deal with civil liberties or fundamental rights, they deal with economic issues. Courts are a little more lenient in upholding those decisions than they would be in upholding decisions that impinge on fundamental personal liberties. So we knew we were up against it. The third aspect, of course, was that what the hell is a cryptocurrency, and how do I, who know nothing about it, explain that to three gentlemen who are very learned in the law, but possibly by dint of being 20 to 25 years older than me, even less likely to have encountered this. So that was another aspect. And the fourth aspect was that the more you read about cryptocurrency, you learn that it's not all flowers and fairies, right? There are serious issues, and I think justified issues that people have with it. Money laundering, ransomware, right? These are all issues that law enforcement deals with. So to suggest that these are not issues and we shouldn't, you guys are completely blinded. Everybody has a perspective, right? I mean, if you talk to any regulator in the world today, whether it's a financial system regulator or a law enforcement regulator, one of their main concerns today is how do we deal with cryptocurrency? Because with the rise of ransomware almost has a straight line drawn to the rise of cryptocurrency. So yeah, it's a fact. You can't see. This is the thing. I mean, there's a difference between an enthusiast and a lawyer.
Correct. You're right.
And we had to understand what a reasonable argument would sound like in court. If I stood up in court and became argumentative about the very fact that there's nothing concerning about this instrument, right?
You can't wish away the problems. Yeah.
It's not about just wishing away problems. That's not how courts deal with issues, right? They don't see it from your point of view. If you're the Supreme Court of India, you say that any law that I lay down today is not a law for IIMI versus a Reserve Bank. It's going to be cited 50 years from now, right? On the principles that we lay down. So we have to be very careful about the principles we lay down, and we have to be very careful about making sure that we get it right. And if responsible officers of the government, right, whether it's or the RBI, are standing up and telling us that this is something bad, we can't just look the other way. We have to make sure we get it right. So we had to spend a long time making sure that we understood what a reasonable argument would be. And so these were the factors that went into our approach. And I think the more I read about, we had a very good team of lawyers. They'd done a lot of research, not just on cryptocurrency, but on RBI's decision-making process. The more we read through the papers, we realized that the decision-making process itself was very flawed. If you are going to ban something, and if I was to say that we came up with a theme, it would be this: try to explain cryptocurrency in a way that people get it. Which I think we managed, and beyond the point, it didn't matter because what we were telling the court was something has been banned. These are old world technology neutral rules which apply to bans. And when you decide whether a ban is legal or not legal, you have to decide whether the ban has followed these rules. And these are the facts of this case. And that would show you that the ban is not completely justified. So one was explain cryptocurrency in a way that doesn't complicate things more than it should. Two was acknowledge that there are very intelligent, learned, knowledgeable people in the world in positions of elected authority, in positions of technocratic authority, who have a problem with cryptocurrency. And acknowledge that some of those problems are true and justified problems. and then apply the rules of law that we know. So we did acknowledge that, and our theme became regulate, don't prohibit. That was the whole theme of our case, that we are not saying that these problems don't exist, but the simple rule is that if you can regulate something, you should not prohibit it. And has the RBI applied its mind to seeing whether this is a regulatable problem, if I may coin a phrase, as opposed to a problem that can only be dealt with by a ban? So that's really the approach we took. And the second aspect was that we really went after the RBI's decision-making process rather than the decision itself. So we started off saying that there's nothing, and this is true whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's alcohol, it's true for everything. There is no more extreme measure in the law than a ban. It really is, it's putting a black curtain over something and saying that you can't do it. And I believe we live in a system where if a government gets to say that to you, it has to justify that very strongly. So one of the things we said was that when you decide to ban something, it's a policy decision. And the rule is that some guy sitting in Bombay who's running the monetary system of India can't decide the desirability of cryptocurrency, keeping in mind law enforcement, keeping in mind the environment, keeping in mind consumer rights, keeping in mind hacking, keeping in mind speculation. These are not the RBI's domains of expertise at all. How can the RBI tell you whether a cryptocurrency transaction can be tracked or not? They're standing in court and telling you that these are completely anonymous transactions. And here I have a document that the FBI filed in a US federal court saying that we have de-anonymized Bitcoin transactions across the line. Now, you may still think that it should be banned, but the person making that decision should have the expertise. And RBI is not a law enforcement organization. And so, the trouble with the RBI was that they were mainly standing there and throwing the kitchen sink at cryptocurrency.
Correct.
They were saying it's against the environment, it's against, it creates, there are hacking issues, it finances everything. And that kind of made it easier because we said, how do you know all this? You're the RBI. If you came and told me the interest rate should be 5%, I respect that. But if you came and told me that, the AK-47 should be banned in India, you and I know as much about it, So the example we gave the court was that so number one, we said that only Parliament, this was our first argument. And all of this will tie up together in the end. So just let me tell you a little more about it. So our first argument was that when you decided to take an extreme step like banning, the law is that only Parliament, it's a policy decision. It's a decision that must take into consideration all aspects. And so the policy must come from Parliament. So the RBI has been founded by an act. It's a body corporate. It has powers to regulate the monetary system, the credit system, the financial system. But if the RBI were to come to you today and say that, look, we think alcoholism is creating a serious problem in India, it's affecting productivity. So we are going to instruct our banks not to deal with companies that manufacture liquor or sell it or trade it, right? Could you say that the RBI has the power to decide whether Indians should consume alcohol, right? So we said that that kind of policy can only come from, it's an extreme example, but it drives home the point. That kind of policy can only come from a legislature saying that no alcohol in India. And then the RBI can facilitate the implementation of that policy. But for the RBI to ban something on its own is usurping a function that it cannot possibly have. No one elected the RBI, right? So that was argument one.
And at some point, the RBI also said, we are actually not banning it. We are just telling our banks not to service.
Yeah.
People are free to keep trading.
Well, they had to backpedal because of that argument. But their own reply in the Supreme Court in writing was that we have banned it. So they had to backpedal precisely because of that argument. And if you read the judgment, somewhere the judge says you render the entire industry comatose, which is as good as a ban. You've not really done anything different. And that's the other thing. The moment they started saying it's not a ban, this is something that the judges understood, that if you don't have access to the banking system, you don't have access to business. You know, you're not, you can't, the two can't be separated. You can't say they can carry on their business. They just can't use the entire banking channel of the fifth largest economy in the world, right? Especially if their business is only online. So that the judges were very clear on, that if that this is akin to a ban. So the first argument, which was, and I'll come to why these were roundly rejected, but the first argument was that the RBI has done something that's outside its powers. The second argument that we used was that even if this was within its powers, it needs to have satisfied itself in an objective way that the decision is justified. And they've done nothing to reach that satisfaction. Satisfaction is another one of the tenets of the law that we constitutional administrative lawyers use a lot, saying that any decision has to be based on objective materials. And when you read those objective materials, the decision you reach is a decision that a person could have reasonably reached. So show me the materials, and then we'll decide if it was a reasonable decision or not. So we said, let's see what the RBI has in terms of materials. Somebody had, an intrepid young man had sent an RTI question to the RBI just after the ban, saying, did you constitute a committee to decide whether cryptocurrency should be banned? Did you constitute a committee to say that it should be studied? The answer was no. We pulled out an RBI report of, this was a 2018 circular, so we pulled out a 2017 November report by the RBI, which said that cryptocurrency is a fringe activity and has no impact on the economy. And we compared that with what they wrote in court, justifying the ban, saying that it's a great danger to the economy, even though the decision was 4 months later in April. So then the court got interested, and it told the RBI to produce the Subhash Chandra Garg committee minutes. That became even more interesting, because in those minutes, it became very clear that two things became clear. One was that the RBI had a very clear agenda to ban it. There were rumors that we heard that the finance minister had instructed a ban, and that was being implemented through the RBI. I don't know if they're true. What also became clear was what also emerged was a very interesting document, because as you know about the Subhash Chandra Garg committee, it consisted of representatives of SEBI, the RBI, the Central Board of Direct Taxation, and the Department of Economic Affairs. And RBI and CBDT were very clear that it should be banned. And I remember there was this 1 minute of the committee which said that people are deliberating, everyone is asked to deliberate about what the issues of cryptocurrency are, whether banning is the only way and how that ban should be implemented, or whether there is another way. And all 4 of them submitted their views. And the RBI's note was a 1.5-page note, which literally read, we were asked to consider whether banning is the only way. Yes, banning is the only way. And this is how we'll implement the ban. And the playbook that they wrote to implement the ban was almost exactly the language you find in the circular. So they had made up their mind without actually just saying these are the reasons why. What was even more interesting was a Department of Economic Affairs circular, their note, which said something which I thought was very reasonable. They said, look, people look to India today as a growing powerhouse in the IT sector. This is a new technology. We don't know where it will go. But to make it unavailable to people and to ban it seems a little excessive and a little unreasonable, given that we have a young population that is trying to become, the population to deal with technology. Number one. So we don't think we should ban it. Number two, that doesn't mean there are problems. There are problems, but each one of those problems can be dealt with in a surgical way, legislatively. So if you think that people can remit foreign exchange abroad through crypto channels, you can make that an offense, right? Or if you are afraid that cryptocurrency is going to substitute the rupee as a currency and therefore affect monetary policy, you can say it can't be used as a currency. But to say that we will stop people from owning it or trading in it, that seems excessive. And that was a very reasonable view, and that really impacted the court. Because here was the Department of Economic Affairs saying that there is an alternate to a ban. So that was so we showed the court very clearly that the RBI had not thought it through. There was one letter they wrote to us where we said, after that first hearing, the Supreme Court had told us told them to reconsider. We had written them a letter. They wrote back, and they said we are not very clear on how cryptocurrency technology works. Those were their words. So we showed the court that. We said, here's somebody banning something without knowing how it works. How does that work? Are we living in some kind of, tin pot dictatorship that somebody decides they don't like something? They don't understand it, but they don't like it. So they're going to stop it, right? So that was number two. And number three was a much more nuanced constitutional argument, which was essentially an argument, I think the starting point was liberty, that we are still a very much constitutional nation with a very strong history and tradition of fundamental rights. And it doesn't matter what your intention was as the RBI. It may have been very noble. But if your impact is to stop me from doing something, then it has to be, we have this notion of people keep saying, yes, free speech, but it's not, but there are limits to free speech. Yes, there are. Yes, freedom of business, but there are limits to it. Yes, there are. But that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that the restrictions should be reasonable restrictions. So even if you say there's a restriction to a liberty, it has to be a reasonable restriction. If you ban a paper because you didn't like what it said, that's not a reasonable restriction. A reasonable restriction would be to say that please take that article out, as an example. I have a different view on whether that would be a reasonable restriction. But so we told the court that how do you decide whether something is reasonable? A ban again is the hardest thing to justify as a reasonable restriction, right? Now the courts have come up with this notion with this very hallowed doctrine of proportionality. Mm-hmm. And what that doctrine says is that, first of all, you must show me that the measure you have taken is in pursuit of a justifiable state action. So it has to be something that the state has an interest in, right? So if you say tomorrow that I want to kill all blue-eyed babies, the state has no interest in there's no legitimate state interest in children having a particular eye color or not. So there has to be, number one, a legitimate state interest. Number two, the measure has to be narrowly tailored to meeting only that interest. So if you say that I want to kill all blue-eyed babies, but I want to kill their mothers also, right? Because they are the ones who gave them the blue eyes. So the measure can only be to kill blue-eyed babies. I'm not suggesting that should be done. So it has to be narrowly tailored to reach that interest. And the crux of this test is that you have to show the court that there is no other way for you to achieve the same goal. This is the only way. It's the least intrusive way to reach the goal. So that's what we focused on, that the Department of Economic Affairs has actually written the playbook for how to reach the goal without a ban. We don't need to say more. Here's somebody saying we don't understand it. We haven't thought about it. We don't have full power and authority to decide on it. But we have decided it should be banned. Why? Because we're the RBI. Don't second guess us. That was literally the RBI's argument for a long time. So these were
at which stage did the draft bill, the 2019 or the 2018 draft bill, get introduced into evidence, which talked about 25 years in prison? 10 years in prison and 25 crores in fines.
We never brought it in because part of it was we didn't want to suggest that Parliament was dealing with this issue. We had strategic reasons not to bring it in because one of the things the RBI kept saying was that let the government has a bill, let them pass the bill, adjourn the case till then. And so we had come to court saying that the government can decide what it wants, but we have challenged the circular. So we didn't want to link the two in any sense. So we just stayed away from that. Though I'm sure the judges read the bill, but we didn't get into it. Okay. So these were the three arguments that we lined up. Number one, you don't have the power. Number two, satisfaction. And number three, even if you have the power and even if you were satisfied, your measure was not the least inclusive measure. There were many other things you could do to achieve the same thing, which would fall short of a ban. Now, you say, reading the judgment, that 150 pages go by and you just feel like this is all going the other way. Yes, but that's not what it seemed like in court. In court, it seemed like every point was making sense to everyone.
Okay.
But when judges go into a room and decide what to do, as I told you, they don't decide that, oh, we really like the way Ashim argued. And we think that in this case, the RBI has got it completely wrong. So we are going to ram them. No. They are ultimately the judicial statesmen. And they say, look, the RBI got it wrong. We think so. And we are going to, and we want to strike down this measure. But we don't want to become, for this to become a template for challenging every RBI action. Tomorrow, the RBI, if we hold that the RBI does needs to satisfy a court every time it takes a decision, that the decision was justified. If the interest rate goes from 5 to 7%, someone will show up in court, in a high court in this country, excuse me, citing the Supreme Court judgment, saying that the RBI's decision can, the RBI's justification and its thinking can be reviewed by a court. That's problematic. Even for me, that's problematic. Our idea was not, I always knew we'd lose the powers argument. I always knew we'd lose the satisfaction argument. Our idea was only to show that there is a problem at every stage of the RBI's process. It's very clear that they were exercising power over something that's not fully within their domain. It's very clear that they didn't think about it. You may not want to use that as the platform for striking down the action, but with every thinking, intelligent person, it registers that this decision has not been followed in the way we would expect the RBI to do it. So the court said, no, the RBI is one of our holy cows. Cryptocurrency directly relates to currency. So how can you say that they don't have the power to deal with it? Number one. They didn't really get into the question of whether parliamentary policy is required or not. Number two, they said that the RBI is not like a magistrate sitting, deciding whether someone should get a ration card, or whether they're a citizen or not. Their objective evaluation of a situation can be second guessed by us. They ultimately, they are godlike. They know everything that's going on in the world. Simply because they don't have anything to show us in terms of material doesn't mean they were not alive to the rise of cryptocurrency. So we are not going to use that as a reason to restrain them either. But we do agree that they were completely unjustified in banning it because there were many other measures that could have been taken. Now, that's the proportionality argument that won. But when you read the judgment, the proportionality argument, when it deals with that, there's one para which says it all about it. They say that the factors that weighed with us in finding the measure disproportionate were, number one, the government has not enacted a law banning cryptocurrency. Number two, the RBI has not presented any empirical evidence of actual damage to the economy. Those are precisely our first and second arguments. Exactly the arguments we made. They just didn't want to say that those arguments in themselves are enough. That if you don't have the power, you're out. If you haven't shown justification, you're out. They made it a part of a more nuanced legal analysis. And they said that you're out. So that's really, when we had approached this case, we said we have to seem reasonable and we have to make the RBI appear unreasonable. And I think that worked. And that's what prevailed in the end. And so I think, however, yes, I think it's one of those video games where if you shoot at the villain, he becomes more powerful. I'm not calling the RBI a villain. I have great respect for them, but they became more powerful as a result of this judgment. But I think a couple of interesting things emerged. Number one, the court has applied the proportionality doctrine to the RBI. So next time they are vulnerable, at least in that part. And the court said something that made a lot of constitutional lawyers very happy. It said that when you are trying to justify your action, you have to produce empirical evidence supporting the justification. So, and the I'll just say this as an aside. I know this has nothing to do with cryptocurrency, but you're an IIM group, you're interested in everything. When the Aadhaar case came, one of the arguments by the government was that we are linking Aadhaar with bank accounts mandatorily because that will help kill black money. And the government say, you're just saying that. Like, you've not shown us any evidence how many people are using the banking channels for black money. We don't even think black money comes out of banking channels, you know. So they said this to begin with there. And they said there's nothing empirical, you're just saying it. You know, show us some study you've done. Then it was then a judgment came where the Bombay High Court, the government in Maharashtra banned dance bars in Bombay. And they said that this is to further women's rights or whatever, right? I mean, they had their justification. And the court said, look, we are all for, if you think that women are trafficked in dance bars, we agree with you. And that needs to be dealt with. But show us some proof that they have been trafficked and at the levels that you're claiming they're trafficked in, because we have to strike a balance. So that's very interesting and important generally now when you're dealing with public policy issues, right? So if you're dealing with, oh, I want access to the originating message in a WhatsApp exchange, right?
Correct. Which is what's happening now.
Is WhatsApp being used all over the world for crime? And do you have no other way of tracking crime? And is this the only way that you can use, is knowing the originator of a message the only way to track a crime, right? These are the questions that arise. So this line of judgment is gathering steam. And I think in technology issues, that kind of nuance about are there other ways to achieve what you want to do, that becomes very important.
And it also becomes possible. In the case of technology, there are usually multiple ways to arrive at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, a great example is the FBI routinely asks Apple to unlock iPhones connected with crime, right? And Apple routinely refuses. And what does the FBI do? Does it put its hands up and say, I can't solve crimes? It goes to Israel or it goes to companies around the world. It pays someone $25,000 and they hack the phone for them, right? Yeah. Now in the US, through their constitutional scheme, the balance between letting Apple be independent and making the FBI spend $25,000 is a no-brainer. You know, that $25,000, if that's the price of liberty, we'll pay it. Yeah. That's a no-brainer. So that's a question that will arise here also. Let's see how the courts deal with it.
Interesting. No, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for taking us through the entire journey. Sorry?
I think I spoke too long. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. So having spent more time with the RBI than any of us have, what is your assessment as to what is their problem? Because in the recent past also, the governor has come out and said that, we are opposed to cryptocurrency, even after the verdicts from last year. So I'm just trying to understand that if one doesn't ask for evidence or studies, but wants to understand their worldview as to why it needs to be banned, what would that look like?
I mean, what would if you manufactured CDs in the 1990s, what would your view on streaming be? So it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you take a dim view of something that threatens your existence in your mind, whether it does or not, I don't know. But if you're not very literate on the subject and someone comes and tells you there's this thing which has the word currency in it. And one of the things we told the court was that, look, the whole internet nomenclature system is based on making things, on bringing things in from the real world. So if something's stored on the cloud, doesn't mean there's a real cloud. If I'm using a mouse, doesn't mean there's a rodent with a tail in between my hands. So I use the word currency again to simplify what it signifies. That doesn't mean it becomes a currency. But so I think partly it's that. I think there's a lack of, I don't want to say literacy, but about the subject, there are some views set in stone. But I think there is also a much more legitimate view, right? I mean, I think if you are the custodian of the country's monetary system, you would be concerned about the rise of an asset class, which does not permit you to regulate the supply and demand of money in the country.
Okay.
Right? So if you are the RBI today and you're deciding, how should I deal with the interest rate? You find out what's the supply of money in the markets, what's the demand for money. You try and what do we want to achieve? These are the 3-4 objectives. What are bond prices looking like? How will this impact markets? And you come up with a very scientifically determined figure. But that very scientifically determined figure gets undermined when there is a large chunk of the economy missing from your supervision, right? So if suddenly 10% of monetary flows around the country are in a currency that you have no supervision over, you didn't print it, you don't know where it's gone, right? You can't accurately predict as a monetary system regulator how your decision is going to play out, and you can't accurately regulate some things. So I think that's a legitimate concern. I mean, that's if I was the RBI, I would. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I was saying all central banks will face the same problem. It's not only
most of them are concerned about it. That's precise. The Basel, there was a statement by the Basel guys the other day, who are essentially a federation of central banks. They're all concerned about it, and that to my mind is a legitimate reason to be concerned about an alternate currency. Now the question is cryptocurrency actually becoming an alternate currency, or is it becoming an asset class? And I think this is a common trope, but if you had a Bitcoin with you and you knew there was a possibility that it would grow from $200 to $2,000 in the next 7 days, would you go and spend it? No, you would never use it as a currency. You'd use it as possibly a high risk investment. Right? So that's where the Supreme Court said, show us. You're saying you're the monetary regulator. You're saying it has a great potential to damage the economy. Show us that it is sufficient for you to make that level of intervention in it. When your own report of November 2017 is saying to us that it's a fringe activity with no realistic or no significant impact on anything. But yes, to your question, that's probably what a central bank should be concerned by if there's an alternate currency coming out.
Right. And the other question is, so the RBI asked for it to be banned directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
But knowing how crypto works, which is that it works on the internet, right? So unless you turn off the internet, you can't really ban it, right? So how does the ban fit into that reality, which is that you can't really ban it at the end of the day? As a technology, it's not bannable in that sense.
Yeah, I think this is something I wrote the other day, saying that the answer to ransomware is not banning cryptocurrency, because you may ban it in India, but if someone hacks an Indian company, he's not going to ask for cryptocurrency to be transmitted to him in India. He's going to be sitting in Russia or China or wherever they're sitting, right? And so he doesn't care whether it's banned in India. So you really not achieved it. So I agree. I think you miss the point of the internet entirely if you think that a ban can achieve things. Partly. I think partly that's true if you're a free society, right? So I think some part of it depends on, philosophically where we lie as a society. You can create great firewalls around the internet, as we've seen with our neighbor to the north, right? So it's possible. Some people will get around it, but if you have draconian laws saying 10 years in prison for you for getting around it, the law can be weaponized as an instrument of fear. You have seen great examples of even the internet being regulated with, I would say, by fear, largely by fear. Yeah. So I think it depends on, if you think that we're a society whose values are akin to that of China, then it's easy to give you a pathway for implementing a ban. And that's true for most activities, by the way. But if you think you're a society that wants to give free play to young people and to their ideas, wants to give people a chance, that wants to let people figure things out, then a ban is much harder to implement. And if we are that kind of society, then we are not going to be able to sustain laws that try and ban the internet.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think if the RBI had done more studies or gone and taken inputs from additional stakeholders, it could have turned out differently for them in court? Or do you think proportionality would have been the place where they think?
I think so. I think, well, number one, if they had, you see, if the RBI had decided that, look, we want to dress this up a little bit, yes, it would have come out differently for them in court, but I give the RBI more credit than that. I think if they are one of our good regulators, SEBI is another one. I think if the RBI had actually done its homework, they would not have reached that 2018 circular. They would have come out with some kind of paper urging regulation, urging amendments to the law to make sure that all stakeholders are protected.
Got it. And right now, there are talks about the 2021 bill being discussed. It was supposed to be discussed in the Feb session, then they're saying winter session, now they're saying monsoon session. Do you think that if the bill comes out and if the bill is not looking to ban cryptocurrencies, presuming that is the case, do you think the RBI will finally warm up to cryptocurrency?
It'll have to, because Parliament's put it out of the RBI's purview then, right? I think that bill says you can't use it as a currency, and that, I think, is the whole of the RBI's problem with it. The rest is for the RBI came with its reasons. They said consumers are being made fools out of, their accounts are being hacked, there's no grievance, there's no number on a website which you can call. Okay, all those are good reasons, but those are for Parliament to take care of, right? And we have laws, we have a consumer protection law, we have all sorts of things. I mean, you can tweet for oxygen on Twitter and go to jail. So I'm sure an FIR can be filed against you if you've stolen somebody's Bitcoin. So all I mean is, if it says that currency is not a problem, currency, it can't be used as a currency, then the RBI's right to fret about it comes to an end. The rest is for the government or Parliament to decide over as a body.
Yeah, yeah. So the other question that we have, right, the other theme or section that we want to maybe cover is, in case what comes through the new bill, right, the 2021 bill, whether it comes this year or next, if that turns out to be a ban, right, on cryptocurrency, what can we expect legally that ban or that bill to look like, right? In terms of what would be the target, who would the ban focus on, what would be the kind of scope of the ban, right? And yeah, maybe some thoughts around that.
Well, I think the scope of the ban could be 3 or 4 ways. One is to just ban it outright, right? The other is to say that I'm banning the use of it as a currency. If I find you using it as a currency, that's a problem for me. The third could be that I'm not banning you from owning it, but I'm banning you from trading it, right? Though I think if they reach that point where they're not banning someone from owning it, they will probably hand it over to SEBI or someone to regulate it. That would be the most logical thing to do, because your problem with it as an asset class is that it's so volatile. So you hand it to a markets regulator, right, to do it. So I think if a ban, let me talk more about if it was a complete ban or any kind of ban. What would a potential judicial challenge look like, and what would its outcome be? And it would certainly be much more challenging, because now we are dealing with precisely our first 2 arguments, right? The body that is supposed to have I mean, saying this about Parliament almost makes me laugh a little bit, but the body that's supposed to have the wisdom to know it all and to know what matters, all the issues that matter. I mean, I'm being unfair because many laws have a lot of work that have gone into figuring things out. I don't know if this, I'm only talking about this law. Like, I don't know if this law has had that work going. But does, so that body has decided that as a matter of economic policy, we think that one particular commercial activity should not occur. So we're up against essentially if I mean, you're up against the Great Wall in that sense, because you're dealing with parliamentary legislation on economic issues. So those are challenges. That doesn't mean that any kind of ban will survive. If you say that I'll send you to jail for 10 years for holding a Bitcoin and nothing more, not for financing terrorism, for just having accidentally forgotten to delete it if you can.
Or 25 crores in fines.
Right, or 25 crores. I think something like that, a hammer being thrown at a little fly, that obviously is going to be harder for the government to sustain. But I think if they say we don't like this, we don't want this activity here, that could survive. That could survive a challenge. Again, it depends on the nature of the legislation. Then it depends a little on what the judicial viewpoint of it. We often say about the Supreme Court that there isn't a Supreme Court in India. There are 12 Supreme Courts in India because they sit in 12 benches of 2 or 3 judges. Each judge has a different judicial philosophy. But I think largely it would make it much harder for the industry if this ban was brought about by a parliamentary process.
But the same questions around proportionality and other things could be arguments.
It would very much. But I'll also add this. I think in 2020 March, the world knew much less about cryptocurrency than it does today. And I can't even say what the judicial viewpoint with the same 3 judges would have been if I had argued it today. Because somewhere or the other, if you're going to, read that straight line between ransomware and cryptocurrency, somewhere if you're going to start reading reports about, the greenhouse effects of it, you get influenced. So again, the world is changing quickly, and I think a lot of people in the industry also recognize that people who are involved in the political process have changed their minds from a negative outlook to a somewhat positive outlook. So, somewhere you have to give time. Time has its own function. So,
true. And in terms for our layman audience, right? Help us understand how do bans work, even when they come into effect. Can it be said that we've banned or made something illegal today, but since you did this 3 years ago, we're going to hold you accountable for it and penalize you for it?
Yeah. So okay. So sometimes laws have these what we call grandfather clauses, and they have something what we call sunset clauses. So a grandfather clause is that if something happened before the law came in, that's okay. It's grandfathered in. So if you purchased cryptocurrency 3 years ago, you get to keep it. Then there's a sunset clause that we give you this much time, but the sun sets on you. So within 3 months, 3 years, you have to divest yourself. So bans can have those sort of provisions in them. Now, what you specifically asked me is that if I've done something 3 years ago, can I be prosecuted for it today? The short answer, can that be made a crime today? The short answer is no. Under our law, there's nothing, we call it ex post facto laws, that in no previous action that was previously not a crime can be deemed to be a crime. That's the law. But the crime in this case would not be that you bought a cryptocurrency 3 years ago. The crime would be that you haven't sold it today after the law came out. So that may not take you very far.
Interesting. No, this is fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. I'm going to look at some questions that have been coming in. So one question, which is, do you see or have you heard of global coordination that's happening between many other countries, right? In your research, the G7, the G20, You talked about Basel, you talked about, I think in the judgment, it talks about a European BIS, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So what is your view about what the world at large is doing when it comes to cryptocurrencies and
What
central
the
banks
government, what the
and
government,
Supreme Courts?
sorry, what's my view about the government, what the government is doing?
No. What do you think is happening in other countries
Ah, so
around cryptocurrency laws?
yeah. So look, I mean, I follow most technology laws from a privacy and freedom perspective, and I think this is not just a cryptocurrency issue. I think it's a general issue with. I think that era of free play uh, in the internet is largely coming to an end. Um, the US is coming up with antitrust legislations. All countries across the spectrum, whether you consider them countries with a with a sense of liberty or countries opposed to liberty, where all countries for various reasons are now coming to the conclusion that more regulation is required in every sense. That's a I think if the regulation is content neutral and it enables content neutral regulation, that's great. You know, but if your regulation is that you wrote something against me, but you didn't write something against him, so I'll put you in jail. That's problematic. But that's not what we're talking about here. All I mean is there is now a sense coming into the world, whether you're the EU, whether you're Russia, Turkey, India, China, the United States, Brazil, that we have to sink our teeth into some of these issues. We can't just let them lie. And that I think that itself is I think it's a very momentous moment in global legal approaches to the internet. Because for the last 30 years, there's been this sense of that's a parallel universe. We don't have to deal with it. And suddenly the realization has dawned that it's the universe you're living in. And countries at different paces are beginning to get with the idea of even doing something about it. And I think once you start developing a legislative regulatory approach to all issues, it will actually sort of lubricate your mind to deal with issues on cryptocurrency also in a more nuanced way.
Yeah.
No, you won't just say ban crypto. You'll say, okay, we have a bunch of smart guys who told me how to deal with Twitter. Now guys come and tell me how do I deal with crypto. I know that we can do this. So I think it's a good thing from a crypto perspective if countries are beginning to get to regulation. Because I think between free play and a complete ban, there's a large gap, and that's really where governance should play its role.
Yeah, no, you're right, absolutely. And in fact, what will be interesting also is to see what happens to El Salvador, right? Which earlier in June has said, we are going off of the US dollar and we're going to, by September of this year, start looking at Bitcoin as legal tender. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are wondering whether it'll be the beginning of something interesting, or it'll be the first of many maybe failed experiments of using a volatile currency to be the.
I think the beauty of the human condition is that we're always looking forward to finding out these things, right?
Sure.
And what we don't like is when someone says, I won't let you find out. So that's when we feel constrained. So I think you're right. It will be an interesting experiment. I'm glad it's El Salvador trying it, I mean, if someone has to, they're an interesting country generally. So it's fun.
Nice. Let me just have a look at any other questions. Yeah. One final question, right? From a point of view of the cryptocurrency regulation draft bill that we are expecting this year, what do you expect? Do you have an insider's view as to how soon that might be brought into Parliament, or do we know?
I have no information, and I have no knowledge of that. As I said, I come into the picture after the laws are passed.
Got it. All right. So that is all the questions we had. Thank you so much. And for the vote of thanks, let me invite Akhilesh back. Um, Akhilesh, over to you.
Thank you, Kamal, and thank you, Ashim. I think this was a fantastic masterclass in legal strategy as to how to go about dismantling, if you will, a set of processes that have been put in, or a set of rules that have been put in place without the due process. Having worked in the government where we used to have large multiple stakeholder discussions before we could arrive even at a single change of a comma, in a sense, I find it fascinating that RBI proceeded as quickly as it did for its wisdom, in a sense, to be questioned in a court of law. But I think it has given all of us a good opportunity to reflect back on seeing how laws and regulations should be framed. I think some of the points that you mentioned with respect to how the new set of laws could come in, and if they were to be very restrictive or not proportional to the sort of challenges that they may create, there may still be an opportunity for us to create a fine balance which balances both the individual freedom to perform businesses, etc., and the government to tread on the right side of balance on issues like money laundering, ransomware, etc. So I think it's for us, it's been a good session to understand this balance. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I think this will help shape our thinking as we go ahead and speak with industry participants, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Take
Thank
care.
you.